can go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear in the back? Is this mic good? Okay, so welcome to our Skills Forward Learning in the Open edX platform session. I'm Jenna Makowski, the Senior Product Manager for Open edX at Axim, and I am joined by Annie Cellini, my colleague from Axim, and Mary Gwozdz from Unicon. You heard a little bit about Unicon just before the lunch break, so we'll talk a little bit more about Unicon and the work they've been doing with Axim a bit later in the presentation. So the objectives for today, the learning objectives, right? So by the end of this presentation, you will be able to. What we want to do is introduce the skills forward platform focus that Axim has been exploring for 2025 and 2026, as well as introduce some findings from some market research and product discovery initiatives that we've been leading, and then talk a little bit about potential next steps for the Open edX roadmap as it aligns to this market research and to this product research. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty details, though, I wanted to take just a minute to kind of ground us in the process that we used and a little bit of context as to why we are, why we're focused on this and how we landed on it. So there was actually a conversation that popped up yesterday in one of the working group sessions around what use case are we actually developing the Open edX platform for? Because this would in theory help to drive product decision making and marketing and website design and all of that. And I think the complicated answer is that there is no single use case that the platform supports. Right? We're a complicated, complex, international, global community. We have lots of different providers in different regions trying to meet different needs. And so the general strategy is that we've been focused on trying to simplify the core of the platform so that we can build on top of it. So there's flexibility in terms of being able to build on top of it. And Axim has also been asking this question of how can we, what do we want to be building on top of this as well? What aligns with our mission? What aligns with how we want to be leveraging the strengths of the platform in order to meet that mission? And then we've also been asking the question as well, what can we do as stewards of the platform to help drive adoption, to help open up new potential markets and new potential sectors for the platform. And so that's been a lot of the work that we've been focused on in the last couple of months. And so it's part of what we'll talk about today. But I just wanted to ground this in what our process has been. So starting in, December of last year-ish, we started to do some market opportunity analysis and some alignments to platform capabilities and missions. That's the work that Annie has been working on, and she'll come up here in a moment to talk you through some of those findings. So that's what we were doing from pretty much December to April, May-ish, the last 6 months. And now we've moved on to these next stages, which are exploring market development opportunities and parallel with doing some product discovery. So we took some of the findings from the market analysis, and we've been trying to answer the question, now how does this translate into product strategy? What sort of features do we need to support this market finding? And that's where we've been focused for the last 2 months or so, is how do we align these findings to the product roadmap? And I'll talk about what that is in more detail in a moment. And then the next steps from here will be feasibility studies and approach, how do we build these things? Does it make sense to build them in the core? Does it not make sense to build them in the core? Does it make sense for us to build them at all? And then we'll be moving into pilots, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the session as well. So this is where we are. The bulk of this talk is going to focus on these sort of first 3 steps, the findings from the market analysis, the alignment to the capability and mission of Axim, and then some of the product discovery that we've been doing. So with that, I will turn it over to Annie to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to see you all. Some of you I've met before, Annie Cellini. I've been with the Axim team for a few months. My background, I'm based in the US, born in the UK, and have had about 25 years of experience working with large at-scale organizations like Pearson, Southern New Hampshire University, Coursera, American Council on Education. And one of the things when I came into this process, in terms of identifying the market opportunity that I saw, as Jenna just laid out, being crucial for us, was really thinking about finding a market opportunity that sat at the center of what's happening in the market globally, where our strengths are as a platform, and from an Axim perspective specifically, thinking about the mission-aligned growth drivers, places where we could
both do good globally in ways that align very much to the purpose and mission of Axim. So we'll start with, and I screwed up. Brilliant. I looked at, and this is a big task. I'm presenting 3 slides that are the synthesis of about 200. So forgive the eye chart, and I'll just go through it at a very high level. But I look broadly at higher education, at workforce and corporate upskilling, and at the sort of ministry and national level of upskilling that I also saw us doing the platform. I have a detailed deck on K-12 analysis, but I think where I'm trying to take you here is that for this work, the goal was to make some choices, was to pick some horses and make some bets. And that's what we're trying to do. So global higher education market, obviously very large. I was very interested to better understand what parts of this space were growing and what parts of this space were contracting. I think that's important for the partners in our network and to sort of skate where the puck is going, to use a sports analogy for those of you that like hockey. But what we're seeing, and I think Angel talked about this morning, is this incredible, and I've got a chart in a second, rise of non-degree offerings in the US, but I think that is also a trend that we're seeing globally, driven by disruption from technology changes, from AI, from skills that employers are looking for in graduates, universities needing to respond more than ever to what they're being asked for by employers. This blurring, really interesting blurring of education and work, and sort of more companies looking to educational institutions to provide upskilling and reskilling, and that work happening very much in a way that aligns around careers and helping people get the credentials that they need to make progress in their life. I think, and I'll just pull out just a couple of these data points that really surprised me. One, if you're not familiar with the community college system in the US, that represents about 40% of undergraduate students. So sizable, massive and sizable segment of the population, not typically non-traditional, older working students, many of them part-time, not intentionally seeking a degree, very often seeking a credential that's going to allow them to make progress. I think there are parallels in other parts of the world as well. But a large and historically underserved space where there is tremendous need and also the tremendous possibility of impact. One of the things that I also found very interesting is how large the alternative and micro-credential market is. It's about 10% of the overall higher education market, which was, again, much larger than I thought it was going to be. The other thing that really surprised me was the size of number of students enrolled in non-credit courses at community colleges. So about 4.1 million students in the US. This is a US data point. So those were some of the highlights from higher education. Also looked, as I mentioned, at this sort of national upskilling opportunity. We have considerable representation here from organizations and countries that leverage the Open edX platform, but I was curious about the work of UNESCO, of the World Economic Forum, who are forecasting this massive gap that we will need to upskill and reskill 50% of the global population by 2030, which is just around the corner. I mean, it's absolutely staggering in terms of the amount of need and demand there. And so an enormous amount of time, energy, and money being spent on thinking about the skills that will be needed by those employees, as well as ways that we can rapidly give people the skills that they need as the jobs disappear, as their current skill sets become replaced by technology. And so we see AI as a big driver, but not the only driver of that change. But again, I think what you're seeing here is a lot of the same themes that we're seeing as drivers in higher education also driving these large national upskilling initiatives. And again, delivered through schools and universities for sure, but also federally sponsored or nationally sponsored programs. You're seeing the rise of public-private partnerships as well, which I think is also a really interesting trend in this space. And then last but not least, the largest segment in terms of global spend and in terms of number of learners in the space is the global, what I'm calling the global enterprise upskilling. So this is the upskilling that's being done by corporations and other organizations. I think a really interesting driver here is, again, highly focused on skills, less focused on maybe the credential at the end, but really wanting to understand what are the skills that these learners will need in order to be able to, in the case of employers, help them maintain that competitiveness and be able to continue to thrive as going concerns in, again, a context of massive disruption, primarily driven by AI, but not limited to that. So where this landed me is really thinking about what's sort of sitting at the intersection of all of these areas. I started to see a lot of similar patterns in terms of the need. What are the characteristics in this skills forward learning space? So if you start thinking about the job to be done as being one of helping upskill people, doesn't matter if you're a corporation or a nation or an educational institution, what is the most effective format? How do you make most and best use of people's time? Because time is money. And this move towards people have a lot of skills and competencies. How do you help them figure out what they have and be able to demonstrate that in the most cost-effective and time-effective manner? Also looking at sort of how atomized those skills need to be. So thinking about the length or the unit of measurement is no longer a degree or even a credit. It's sort of happening at a much more micro level. And that, again, seeing across all of these three sectors, really led us to thinking about, and I'll just double click on this because this one blew me away, just to sort of underscore the rise of the non-degree credential. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, particularly in the US, and I confess to being a little US biased because it's sort of sitting right in front of me. But I found some of these data from, this is from Hull and IQ, that the sharp rise in non-degree credential conferral, really fascinating. And it's very interesting to see, even here this morning, organizations like Georgia Tech moving rapidly into this space and seeing, in the face of the contraction of traditional age students maybe choosing to go to college, that universities and community colleges diversifying what they're offering, whether direct to student or through employers. Oh, and I should just, I think you can see it, but the non-degree is the red hockey stick line there. Like, there's a point at which that's going to cross bachelor's, which I think is very interesting. And I would also say, and this to me is very important, because it's not just the pundits or the media saying this, or even learners. University leaders are seeing alternative and micro-credentialing as a really important strategy for the future. And that becomes important with any change management initiative, that you've got this strong desire to move, strong and growing desire to move in this direction. And from a skate where the puck is going perspective, I think having that kind of energy behind a movement becomes really, really important. So that's sort of very fast where we saw the market opportunity. If you want access to the 200 slides, I'm very happy to share that. The business development group has already got access to that. I also took a deep dive at where the platform is currently being used, where its strengths are, who has just naturally or organically found their way to using the platform because it's best fit. And I don't think this will surprise any of you, but I still think it's worth documenting and stating that of our higher ed institutions, the vast majority are using the platform to deliver asynchronously and non-credit. It's not to say that we don't have institutions who are using it on ground, fully residential, but when we look at sort of broad patterns, that what we're seeing, a significant number of the implementations are supporting adult education. We're seeing a strong PMF around product market fit, I should say, around credential delivery. And this very interesting, I continue to find out about use cases of the platform being used for global and national upskilling initiatives. And within our enterprise portfolio, about 75% of those adoptions are being used for workforce upskilling. So the sort of where the platform's already naturally being used became another data point in this analysis. And then the third circle, if you think back to that Venn diagram at the beginning, is around where the opportunity that we see in the market aligns to Axim Collaborative's mission. And I'm just going to take a step to slow down a little bit here because I don't know how much this has been shared with this group, and I apologize if you've seen it before, but it's a question that comes up a lot. So I just think it's important to state it because it also becomes very foundational, I think, to understanding why we have chosen to focus our initial pilots in the spaces that we have. So Axim's mission is to make learning more accessible, relevant, and effective for all learners. I think you will know we're a nonprofit, and our work is to transform education to work pathways by facilitating collaboration and innovations to build on an ecosystem of solutions to drive better outcomes for millions of students. One thing that I've seen about my colleagues' work on the ed transformation side is they delight in bringing together complex organizations from across the ecosystem and finding ways to drive collaboration and engagement in order to catalyze new digital and education practices. And so this focus on engaging students, helping them to persist, excel in their careers, which ultimately will lead to greater social and economic mobility. And I think what's important here to just double click on is that then it's not just about the education, putting the course online, and if you do, hoping that the learners will find it, being very committed to this idea that we want learners to go in, learn what they need to, be able to leverage that skill to get the job that they want, to be able to get the promotion that they need in order to be able to sustain their families or to make progress in their lives. So it really is about making that connection all the way through to driving outcomes. And so I pause on this for a second just to say that is a very important aspect as we thought about where to find this market opportunity, that all of those pieces needed to be true in order for us to be able to determine where to focus. And so the team, using these criteria, I offered up a great variety of options and places and places that we could focus. Really sort of scored against a rubric of where we saw strong alignment to the things that we thought were important in terms of where the market was going, the strengths of the platform, and alignment to mission, and really landed in these areas as places where we wanted to start our initial work in terms of building reference implementations and pilots on the platform. So the first being in this workforce upskilling through micro-credentials, which has sort of evolved to become the skills forward approach. So thinking about how do we make it really easy for institutions to launch low-cost, rapid course creation for online asynchronous courses for these in-demand workforce skills. We have a hypothesis that they should be stackable, that they should be competency-based, because all of those things make those skills more useful ultimately in the course of the arc of a learner's life. And the other area of focus that we're looking at is really thinking about expanding and scaling some of the amazing work that's happening through the Ministry of Education, through NGOs that we partner with. And what we saw was that all of those themes are also true in that market opportunity too. Need for low cost, high scale, high reliability, rapid course creation, aligned to workforce skills, and ideally stackable and something that a learner can take with them through their lives and build upon. Corporate upskilling is on here as well because, again, those themes are very similar in terms of what that market and space is looking for as well. And not to say that it's not important. And by the way, I think there's a huge, very interesting and compelling market opportunity for our partners who are working in that space. But wearing our mission-aligned Axim hat, I think these first two buckets are places that we want to start first because they have such strong mission alignment for us. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jenna.
Thanks, Annie. I've never had the experience where I've just been like sitting and sweating. Okay, so taking everything that Annie has just presented to you, the question on the product side or the platform side is now how does all of that data translate into a product strategy or like roadmap strategy? And so I wanted to come back just for a second though to this slide because I think a couple of these bullet points are really worth reinforcing. The fact that we already have 20 countries using the platform as a workforce training or upskilling platform. The fact that 75% of enterprise adoptions are for workforce skilling and up training. The growth of credential delivery and micro-credentials. All of that to say is that we're building on a foundation that we already have with this. We're not starting from scratch, right? We've been working on sort of putting these pieces together for a while now. And so now it's a question of how do we make them all kind of come together. I want to take a minute though and just talk a little bit about terminology because we've been kind of throwing around a lot of phrases here, right? Competency-based education, skills forward, skills first. So all of these things, right? Skills forward learning, skills first learning, competency-based education, competency-based learning, they're all kind of different flavors of a similar approach or a similar pedagogy. So what is skills forward or competency-based learning? This is information from the Competency-Based Education Network. They were involved with some of our product discovery and product research here. So competency-based education, if there's like one quick TLDR of CBE, it's that this is an approach to learning that emphasizes what people can actually do rather than time in the classroom. So rather than saying you have to take this 2-semester course or this 6-month course or this 6-week course, it's more about what can you actually demonstrate? What skills can you demonstrate against a standardized rubric that can be assessed with some sort of standardized understanding of what the outcome is intended to be, and a credential delivered around that. In terms of the use of this kind of pedagogical method, so as of 2022, there are over 600 2- and 4-year institutions that offer some sort of CBE program. So not necessarily the entire university, but certain programs lend themselves really well to this type of learning. Nursing, healthcare is one example. And recent research shows that 82% of institutions expect these types of programs to grow significantly over the next 5 years. So this is an area of growth. It is a shift kind of institutionally in terms of how a lot of instructional design is done, but it's clear that this is a trend that's not going to go away. The other half of the equation, I think, is really important just to highlight because it's not just about learning, right? It's not learning in a vacuum. It's also about all of these things, right? Skills first hiring, skills-based hiring, competency-based hiring. And of course, the idea here too is that this is hiring or promoting workers around skills or knowledge or abilities that they can actually demonstrate, regardless of how they got them. So it doesn't matter if it came from a degree, if it came from a credential. Some examples here from this report that was put out by the US Department of Labor. A high school student who just taught herself to code and earned a degree or earned an online certificate of some sort. Should not matter when you're putting together a resume as long as you can demonstrate that skill. A previously incarcerated person who earned a certificate in electrical systems in a prison upskilling program. or a restaurant manager who handles bookkeeping despite no formal training because she just learned it from her family, right? They've been running a restaurant for like a century. So all of these things all of this is to say that skills forward learning and skills forward hiring really go hand in hand. This is obviously a bigger problem than like we as the open edX community are going to solve in terms of bringing these things together. But I think if we're focusing at least on one half of this equation, there's a lot of potential here to explore partnerships and integrations with other types of organizations that are working on the workforce dev side of it, so that we can, again, kind of going back to the mission that Axim is focused on, social and economic mobility for learners and giving learners the opportunity to learn skills that they need to get the better job in order to have a better opportunity in life. So that was just kind of some context. So as we've been sort of discovering and exploring over the last couple of months, there's quite a number of different use cases in this space. And I chose 3 use cases intentionally to present today because I think they kind of highlight some ways that we can start to meet these needs more immediately and then also evolve over the next couple of release cycles as well. And so I've organized these from least complex to most complex. And by complex, I don't mean this like a negative way. What I mean is like complexity to actually implement on the platform. So in terms of the least complex, this is one that we heard quite a bit in terms of actually 4-credit curriculum. I know that Annie talked quite a bit about the non-degree space, but this is a need as well in the 4-credit space. So the use case here generally is I want to align the lessons in my courses to independent micro-credentials so learners can accumulate resume-ready skills over time, not just when they complete their degrees. So in other words, I, as a learner in an undergraduate program at, University of Michigan, I take a course and I might want to get a badge after 2 lessons in that course because I've already accomplished a skill that I can demonstrate, that I can test, and I can put that on my resume right away. And this is really important, especially in the US context where college dropout rates are ridiculously high. People are dropping out with a ton of loans and no degree. And so being able to align skills to resume ready tools as learners gain them and can actually go to the market is really, really important. Another use case, it's kind of like in the middle, like a little bit more complex, are non-credit skills aligned credentials. And so a use case here, this is a real life pilot that we're working on hopefully at the moment. I want to take all of the courses in my manufacturing associate's degree and pull out single lessons that can be delivered as non-credit credentials aligned to skills that the local computer chip plant needs in order to fill 100 new jobs that they have available. So this is a community college that wants to take their courses that already exist. They're talking to local industry. The local industry says, hey, we've got like these 100 jobs to fill. It's a very specialized skill. So we need to make sure that learners or our workers are trained. The community college says, hey, I've got these like 6 courses, but the learners really only need like lessons 2, 7, and 8. And so they don't have to go through the whole degree program. That's all they need for that job. And so there's this partnership with the local industry and the community college to say, hey, we're going to pull those lessons out, attach a credential to them. It'll take the learners, 3 weeks to do it. And then they'll be ready to take these jobs and be hired by the local plant. This is, like I said, this is a pilot project that we're currently working on. And then an example of a more complex use case is the competency-based approach, CBE, competency-based education. In this use case, I want lessons, assessments, and skills to be independent and stackable and to track with learners' grades so learners can move through personalized pathways based on their prior knowledge and current needs. So I think a couple reasons why this is the most complex. There's a ton of personalization here. There's a ton of modularity here. So learners are basically going through pulling on prior knowledge that they have, putting that into a rubric, getting a credential, and then being able to sort of move through like choose your own adventure pathways based on what they want to accomplish, the competency they want to accomplish. And there's no one size fits all. So obviously this is the most complex. We're not here yet as a platform, but I think if we can move toward in that direction, we will be able to fill quite a bit of need. If you remember correctly, there's like 82% growth in this space over the next 5 years projected. So there are some, I think, like generalized common needs across these use cases. Of course, as an open source generalized platform, we're thinking about what are the generalized needs here. So all of this is outcomes oriented, so credentials driven. It's not time-based, so the idea of asynchronous learning is really applicable here. Modularity is really important in terms of content delivery, content authoring. Content reusability potentially is very important, as is personalization. So in terms of the roadmap, we've actually been laying this foundation kind of in the background now for a while. Again, think of the platform like they're building blocks. We're building some of the basic functions that we hope can start to achieve these use cases so that they can be designed and customized on top of. I'll just give a couple of high-level examples here. So with personalization. So in Redwood, we had the shift over to the event-driven pipeline and the launch of aspects. In Sumac, we had evolution of the individual learner dashboards. So for the first time, we're actually able to track individual learner data. With Teak, we have in-context analytics. So now we're able to make better connections between that individual learner data and the content that people are interacting with. With Almo, we're going to focus on custom learner grouping, and Verawood and beyond, looking at how we can sort of build out our custom notifications and interventions tools. So you can see kind of the evolution here, right? Same thing for content modularity. So with Redwood, we introduced support for content tagging. So now for the first time, you can align content to competencies and skills and actually show what the outcome is going to be on any particular lesson. With Sumac, Teak, and Almo, we have relaunched libraries, which basically lets you create content independently of the course. So by Almo, you'll actually be able to create an entire section or an entire lesson by itself, attach tags to it, and then Verawood and beyond, we're going to look at what it would actually take to deliver these things independently of a course, right? So you can see how these things start to stack together. We can track individual learner data. We can attach tags to content. We can deliver things independently. And then another piece of the puzzle is, these are just 3 pieces. There's a million pieces. But credentials is another part of this, right? So we have the credential service launch. We have integrations across third-party services. Verawood and beyond, we're going to be exploring credentials delivered at the more granular levels, section, subsection. So you can kind of see how all these building blocks are going to hopefully start to come together so that we can put together these features that are going to lead to these more customizable and personalized use cases. So kind of back to these use cases here. I think with as we move toward Almo and Verawood, we're actually quite close to being able to meet these needs in these first 2 use cases, right? Being able to deliver micro-credentials at a more granular level within a course. So a learner can, take a skill and put it on their resume after lesson 1. With all the content libraries work and tagging, and hopefully by Verawood, the ability to deliver it independently, we'll be able to pull courses apart and deliver pieces of courses in non-degree pathways. But that leaves us with the more complex use case, which is around competency-based education. And this is where I think we still have quite a bit of room to grow and explore as to whether the platform can be used to meet these needs. And this was an area that we were actually quite curious about given the growth in this space. And so Axim partnered with Unicon and the Competency-Based Education Network to do some product discovery work. So I want to invite my friend Mary up here. Mary was part of the team at Unicon that did some product discovery work specifically around this third use case here, the competency-based pathways, to kind of answer the question of what are the key gaps in the platform, where would we have to invest to actually be able to meet the needs in this space. So I wanted to give her a chance to kind of present some of those findings.
Thank you so much. All right. So Unicon had a directive to go out and interview some of the community colleges and 4-year institutions that have already adopted competency-based education. And we ended up interviewing, I think, at least 8 different institutions, many community colleges, as well as Education Design Lab. Most of these colleges were using either D2L Brightspace or Instructure Canvas, and we interviewed them using, we provided a non-technical survey, a technical survey, as well as qualitative interviews, and we were trying to find out how their LMSs were falling short for their competency-based education needs. All right. And so we ended up with 5 key themes to what we heard from these institutions. The biggest one that we heard in essentially every single interview was that they needed more progress awareness, that even in Canvas and D2L, they're still pulling manual reports with spreadsheets and making calculations to try to figure out where learners are in the process, how far along they are. The learners themselves don't know. This can make it very challenging for instructors to do interventions. And so this was a really big area where a lot of need exists. Second, that they mentioned a little bit more often is the need for flexible, personalized content and competency alignment. So tagging content to competencies is one level, but being able to truly create pathways where once the competency progress is tracked, learners can start going down pathways of these competencies are the ones that interest me the most, or these ones align with my current skill level, that can give a really rich experience to the students. And then third is support for evolving learning recognition, grading, and assessment. And so some of this revolves around the need for rubrics to assess what learners already know. And some of it also brings in work studies and more apprenticeship style learning experiences, being able to make sure that those can be captured within the learning management system as well, and tagged with not just grades in a course or grades on an assignment, but what competencies have been mastered. So kind of breaking out of the traditional thinking of earning grades and instead thinking about what competencies have been mastered, what competencies have been demonstrated. And then fourth is role flexibility. So competency-based education brings about some new roles that institutions didn't have previously, like coaches and work study staff. And so these users need to have particular access to certain parts of the LMS, but not others. And so we heard some institutions asking for that as well. And then last but not least is content reusability. So some institutions, or many of them, reuse certain content and competencies within programs. So for example, leadership is needed in many different career pathways. And so if you have leadership components to one course, you might want to include it in your course for electricians, but also your course for business. And so being able to reuse content is another thing that has been very important to the institutions we interviewed. So diving deeper into these and the value proposition for each of them. So for progress awareness allows learners to self-navigate for their goals, and it gives faculty the ability to proactively intervene, and it gives administrators the oversight to be able to update courses as they find out which pieces of content are working and which ones aren't. And so the enhanced progress awareness allows personalization to really scale. It allows learners to be more engaged as they know what they need to do in order to get the degree or their competency that they're looking for. And it drives institutional accountability because then everybody knows, well, these courses were really working for learners. We should copy the methodologies of those ones for these other courses we have that aren't really working. So that's kind of the value proposition for progress awareness. Next, the value proposition for personalized content and competency alignment is that when you have the logic for these different competency pathways that learners can go through, it allows for truly personalized learning experiences that adapt to individual progress. So being able to show and hide certain modules of like, hey, we know you already studied leadership in the electrician course. You don't need it in your business course now. So being able to dynamically show and hide content based on what learners have already achieved, or show and hide content based on learner interest or career interests can be huge value to the learners themselves, and allows them to get closer to their goals and closer to the skills that employers are looking for, and make them feel ready for their career when they can really see that alignment between their course and the pathway that they're taking. And then third is support for evolving learning, recognition, grading, and assessment. So the value proposition for this one is that it allows course designers to have diverse and personalized learning models, and the learners get to benefit from the personalized pacing, guided remediation, and multiple paths to mastery. So similar to what was on the previous screen. The previous screen was more personalization for what pathway they're going on, and this one is getting at more personalization in how it is assessed and personalization based off of what has already been mastered. Next, role flexibility has the value proposition of allowing the coaches and advisors to being able to work with students in different ways, like Jenna was talking about earlier, the notification systems and things like that. Once they're aware of the progress that learners have, they can intervene sooner than maybe an instructor could if the instructor had 1,000 students but the coach only has 20, things like that. So that's the value proposition there. And then for content reuse, so being able to have competency-aware content library with update synchronization and usage visibility can promote efficient reuse, version control, and contextual alignment across platforms. This can reduce duplication of effort. So again, with my example of leadership being in the electrician course and the business course, you don't want to have to recreate all that course content a second time. So being able to say, oh, I know that leadership is in both of these. Let me search for the leadership and then click, apply it to both courses or apply it to a whole group of courses all at once. That saves a ton of time for course designers. And so there's a lot of value that can be gotten there, and it really allows you to scale at that point when you can move that fast, or if it could be automated or imported from a whole set of hundreds of courses. So what this slide shows is the first milestone that I outlined. So I outlined 2 milestones. And so you might have noticed already with what I've said that the 5 themes we saw have a lot of overlap with each other, and some of them are prerequisites. So milestone 1 actually corresponds to themes 2 and 3 of the content alignment and the assessment and grading processes, because you really need to be able to capture what competencies have been mastered before you can measure the progress of what competencies have been mastered. So these 8 features in milestone 1 correspond to how we recommend that Open edX can fill the gaps to be able to address themes 2 and 3. And so the big one here is associating competencies to content with assessment criteria. So every competency-based education program has an idea like if learners earn 75% or higher on 3 quizzes, then that means they've earned the competency. Or if they earn if they demonstrate level 3 out of 4 on 2 assignments, or they demonstrate level 5 on a certain project, then they earn the competency. So we need to really be able to have these complicated logic pathways for demonstrating competency included in the platform. And then milestone 2 is where you really get into the progress awareness, which I think once you have competency mastery tracked in the platform, then you can start showing progress awareness in the platform, as has already been done. I think the most important one in this area is the learner progress map. So as I was explaining, you can have these complicated trains of how to accomplish different competencies. And so it can be difficult for instructional designers to put that together, but it can also be difficult for learners to understand, where am I in this and what more do I need to do to demonstrate? So a learner progress map can go a long way in that. And so that is the last of that, and I'll turn it back to Jenna.
Thanks, Mary. So I realize we're coming up on time here. So just as a quick what's next. So we've got all of this product discovery work. The next steps are to do an analysis around like what's feasible here and what's the best approach. Like, does it make sense to be building some of this into the core? Is it better to be building this on top of the core as plugins? So there's quite a bit of work here to do around feasibility. And then we're also looking at pilots as well. So to just quickly go back here. We'd love to get to a space where we've got actually pilot partnerships built out for each of these different use cases or similar use cases. We're pretty close to being in progress with one of these here. And that's the goal here then, is to get some real life building out of these use cases with pilots. And that is how I would like to kind of end this talk. Again, we want to always be in a process of continual validation and refinement. But we'd love to hear from you. Like, what similar use cases have you heard? Are you already working on kind of implementing something in this space already? And how can we kind of bring all of this knowledge together so that we can be working on this as a community? I think we're right at time, but I think we have coffee after this. So feel free to find us and chat. And thanks.